Mom yelled, "Your kid took the missing $10,000 from the safe." My sister snapped, "We saw him near it." My son looked terrified. I said nothing, just dropped the security footage drive on the table. 5 minutes later, her husband's face turned white. The first time it was just $100. My mom thought she misplaced it. It had been in her wallet that morning, and by the time we were clearing plates after Sunday dinner, it was gone. She mentioned it lightly like it was no big deal, but the way her eyes skimmed the room said otherwise. No one said anything. We all just nodded, changed the subject and moved on. The second time, $300 disappeared from Dad's study drawer. That one was harder to brush off. He always locked that drawer and only family had access to the house. Still no accusations. Just an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air the next time we all sat down for dinner. The third time was when things got weird. $500 gone from my sister Lauren's purse. She said it vanished while she was upstairs changing the baby. She didn't say it outright, but her eyes flicked toward me and my son Mason. That was when I knew something had shifted. Mason is 11. Smart, quiet, loves drawing and video games. We spend a lot of time at my parents' house. After my divorce, they started helping me out with groceries, school fees, and sometimes rent. It was never spoken out loud, but I knew Lauren resented that. Her husband Keith resented it even more. After that third incident, my dad bought a safe. One of those heavy, fireproof ones you bolt to the wall. Digital keypad. He installed it behind a shelf in his office. He told me he'd only given the code to Mom, Lauren, and Keith. Not me. Not Mason. Didn't bother me. I just wanted the drama to stop. But it didn't. Money kept disappearing. At first small amounts. Then larger. $2,000. And then last week $10,000 gone in one sweep. All hundreds. Clean. No sign of forced entry. Nothing missing from the house except the cash. That night no one touched their food. You could hear forks clinking, drinks being sipped just to fill the silence. Dad kept checking his phone. Mom barely looked up. Mason just picked at his mashed potatoes. Lauren and Keith were dead silent. Not even pretending anymore. And then yesterday it all blew up. We were sitting in the living room. The baby was napping upstairs, the TV was playing some random cooking show in the background. I was helping Mom sort through the mail. Dad had gone to his office to check something in the safe again. And then Mom turned to me and said it. "Your kid took the missing 10 grand from the safe." Just like that. No warning. No build-up. She said it like it was fact. Everything stopped. Mason had just come in from the backyard. He froze like someone had cut the oxygen in the room. Then Lauren jumped in. "We saw him near the office. Twice. He was watching you open the safe, Mom. Don't act surprised." No one moved. Keith kept his eyes on the TV like he wasn't hearing any of it. I didn't yell. I didn't defend him. I didn't say a word. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small silver USB drive. Set it down right in the middle of the coffee table. Told them it was footage. The past month. Motion-activated camera. Installed in the ceiling of Dad's office. Hidden inside a fake smoke detector. With Dad's permission. He'd been the one to suggest it, actually. After the second big theft, he didn't know who to trust anymore. Every time the office door opened, it recorded. Every time someone touched the safe, it recorded. Every night, the files got emailed to me. Dad took the drive and disappeared into the den without saying a word. I followed him. Lauren stood up, hesitated, then sat back down. Keith didn't move. Mason looked terrified. I told him to wait. Dad plugged it into the computer. The file was labeled with the exact date the 10 grand went missing. 5 minutes into the footage, it was obvious. The camera caught him entering the office at 2:14 a.m. punching in the safe code. Taking the stacks of hundreds and stuffing them into a black duffel bag. Clean. Like he'd done it before. I heard the floor creak behind me. Turned around. Keith was standing in the doorway, pale as chalk. He didn't say a word. Just turned around and walked out the front door. Keith didn't come home that night. After the footage played, he just walked out. No jacket, no explanation, no apology. The door shut behind him and the sound of it echoed through the house like a gunshot. Lauren stood there frozen, holding her phone like it might tell her what to do. Mom mumbled something about the baby upstairs and disappeared. Dad stayed glued to the screen, replaying the video in disbelief. Mason went quiet. I tucked him into the guest room later and he fell asleep clutching his stuffed bear, like he used to when he was little and scared of thunderstorms. When I came back downstairs, the only light came from the computer monitor. Dad was sitting there, staring at a paused frame. Keith's hand reaching into the safe, his face caught perfectly in the corner of the shot. I could see Dad's reflection in the screen. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. He asked how long the camera had been up. I told him since August. I'd installed it one afternoon while everyone was out. Mom had taken Mason to the park, Lauren was at her prenatal checkup, and Keith was supposedly working late. Dad had been the only one who knew. We agreed we needed proof one way or another. Dad just nodded. Didn't say anything else. The next morning, Keith's car was gone. His phone went straight to voicemail. Lauren sat at the kitchen table in her robe, scrolling her messages again and again. Her eyes were red and puffy. She didn't look at me until I set a cup of coffee down in front of her. She asked if I was proud of myself. Said I didn't have to trap him like that. Trap him. That's the word she used. I told her I didn't trap anyone. The footage just showed the truth. She didn't reply, but I could tell she didn't believe that yet. Dad called us into the dining room around noon. He looked exhausted. The table was covered with printouts, frames from the footage, timestamps, even one photo where Keith's tattoo was visible as he grabbed the envelope of cash. He laid them out like evidence in a courtroom. Mom wouldn't look at the pictures. She just sat there rubbing her temples. Dad said he wasn't calling the police, not yet, but Keith was done. No more help, no access to the safe, no shared accounts, nothing. He was going to protect the family first. Then he turned to Lauren. Told her she needed to decide where her loyalty was. Lauren didn't answer. She just looked at Mason, then at me, then back at the papers. That night, Keith still didn't show up. The next morning, Lauren's debit card got declined buying diapers. When she checked the account, everything was gone. Keith had emptied it, savings, checking everything. That was the moment it hit her. She sat in the hallway holding her phone, whispering his name over and over like saying it enough times would make him come back. By that evening, she finally came to my room. She asked to see all the footage. Every file. I didn't argue. I opened the folder on my laptop and let her watch in silence. The room was so still that the sound of her breathing felt loud. Halfway through the video, she covered her mouth and started shaking. It wasn't just one night. He'd done it 3 times. Same bag, same routine. She hadn't wanted to believe it, but there it was. She left without saying anything. Later, when I checked on her, she was lying on her bed, still in her clothes, the baby asleep next to her. Her phone screen lit up every few minutes with messages from unknown numbers. Probably Keith's gambling buddies or whoever he owed money to. 2 days later, she filed for divorce. Mom cried when she found out. Dad didn't. He just said he should have trusted his instincts sooner. That's when I learned something else. Keith had borrowed money from Dad a month before all this started. $10,000. Said it was for a short-term investment. Dad never saw a cent of it again. It all made sense now. The disappearing money wasn't random. Keith had been stealing to cover his debts, trying to make up for what he'd lost at the casino. Lauren didn't talk to me for a while after that. But when she finally did, she said the words I'd been waiting for. You were right. Then she told me about the last text he ever sent her. Tell your sister she wins. He blocked her right after. Keith vanished without a trace. No one said the word run, but that's what it was. He ran. From responsibility, from Lauren, from the mess he made. I don't think he ever expected to get caught. And I definitely don't think he expected it to be me who caught him. After that final text, tell your sister she wins, his number stopped working. His Instagram went dark. His name disappeared from the online poker forums Dad found when he started digging. It was like he scrubbed himself clean and slipped underground. Lauren spiraled for about 3 days. She'd cry in bursts like it hit her all over again every hour. She kept saying she didn't understand. That she knew things were bad but not this bad. That she'd loved him. That he held their baby the night before like nothing was wrong. Then just as suddenly the crying stopped. She got cold. Focused. I watched her change in real time. She moved back into her old room. She turned down every offer of help. She started doing everything herself. Diapers, feedings, laundry, job hunting. She wasn't angry anymore, not out loud. She just stopped letting anyone close enough to comfort her. Mom coped by pretending none of it happened. She refused to talk about the footage, changed the subject anytime Keith's name came up. She called it a rough patch, like he'd broken a lamp instead of stealing $10,000 and bailing on his wife and baby. The only person who seemed to be dealing with it head-on was Dad. One morning I found him at the kitchen table, laptop open, papers spread out. He was on the phone with his lawyer. Quiet but firm. He was cutting Keith off from everything. Insurance, will, power of attorney, family trust. Gone. Wiped. When he hung up, he looked at me and said, "He used us. All of us. I let him." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. A few days later, a letter arrived. No return address. Just our last names scribbled in the center in Keith's handwriting. Inside was a note that read, "I tried. I really did." No explanation. No apology. Just a motel receipt from somewhere near Reno. There was no room number, just a date. 2 days after he left. Lauren saw it and didn't even flinch. She handed it to Dad and walked away like it was a grocery list. I asked her later if she wanted to talk. She said what's left to say. After that she started trimming people from her life like dead branches. Anyone who had questioned Mason, anyone who made backhanded comments about me, anyone who treated her like she was pathetic for staying with Keith as long as she did. Gone. I started noticing how small things were changing too. Mason wouldn't go upstairs alone anymore. He stopped talking about Keith at all. Even when I brought him up gently, he changed the subject. He was still sweet, still himself, but quieter now. I knew what that meant. I told Dad I was thinking of getting Mason a therapist. He said that was a good idea. Then he paused, took off his glasses and said something I wasn't expecting. He said, I thought it might be him. I didn't understand at first. He looked me in the eye and said, when the money first started going missing. I looked at Mason differently. I hate myself for that. I didn't say anything. I just let it sit. Because that truth hurt, but it also mattered. And to be honest, I had felt it too. In the way Mom triple-checked her purse when Mason was around, in the way Lauren looked at him when something went missing. None of them said it. But they thought it. They thought my son was a thief. A few nights later, Lauren asked to take Mason to the park. Just her and him. She didn't say why. When they got back, she handed him a bag with 3 tubs of ice cream, chocolate, mint chip and the weird mango flavor he likes, and told me he'd pick them out. When Mason went to the kitchen, she looked at me and said, I'm sorry. And I believed her. Life didn't go back to normal after that. But it started to reshape. Quiet mornings. Fewer fights. Even dinners without awkward silences. We were still broken in some places, but it felt like we were gluing the pieces back together, slowly. Keith was still gone. And honestly, none of us wanted him back. By October, the house felt calmer. The kind of quiet that follows a storm, unsteady but peaceful. We still avoided the topic of Keith. No one said his name. It was like we'd erased him from the air. Lauren settled into single motherhood like she'd been preparing for it all along. She was strong, sharper than before, but softer with Mason. Mom still hovered when Mason was around, like she was trying to make up for every side glance she'd ever thrown him. Dad kept busy fixing things. Doorknobs, shutters, the gate. Like keeping his hands moving might keep his mind from dwelling on everything that went wrong. We weren't healed, but we were holding. Then Dad suggested the dinner. He said we needed one night to reset. Something that wasn't about damage control or passive-aggressive silences. Just a family meal, no ghosts at the table. He picked a Sunday just like the ones we used to have and told Mom to go all out. And she did. Roast chicken. Twice baked potatoes. The bread Mason liked. She even pulled out the dusty bottle of wine she'd been saving since 2009. Mason helped her set the table. Lauren dressed the baby in a onesie with little gold stars. Dad wore his old watch. It felt surreal. We laughed more than I expected. Lauren and I joked about old family vacations. Mason said something dumb about how the baby's forehead looked like Keith's and we all froze, then laughed hard. It was the kind of joke you only make when something awful has finally stopped hurting. Then Dad stood up and brought out a small wooden box. He set it in front of me and said, "It's overdue." Inside was a check for $10,000. I just stared at it. He said it wasn't repayment, it was a statement. That they'd failed Mason by doubting him, and this was one way to show that they saw it, owned it. Lauren looked like she might be sick. Then she stood up with her glass and said she had something to admit. "I told Mom I thought it was Mason," she said. Weeks before the $10,000 disappeared. I hadn't seen anything. I just said it. Because it was easier than thinking it might be someone else. Everyone went quiet. Mason didn't even look up from his plate when he said, "I knew." It shattered the room for a second. Lauren sat back down and said she was sorry. That she hadn't just let Keith steal from us. She let him steal our trust too. She looked at me, then at Dad, and said she'd been too afraid to face the truth back then, and that fear cost her everything. I was about to respond when Mom got up and glanced out the window toward the street. She stopped mid-step. "There's someone outside," she said. We all turned. Dad went to the door and opened it. And there, just standing under the porch light like he'd never left, was Keith. But he wasn't the same. He looked like a man who had been living out of his car. His face was drawn, skin sallow, clothes wrinkled and loose. He had a black duffel bag hanging from one shoulder, a busted sneaker with a hole in the toe. He didn't speak, didn't wave, just stared at the house like he was trying to decide if it was still real. Lauren froze. Mason stood behind me. Keith didn't try to come closer. He pulled something from his coat pocket, walked halfway up the driveway and dropped it on the welcome mat. Then he turned around and walked away. No words. No explanation. Dad waited until he was gone, then picked up the envelope. Inside was a mess. Casino chips, pawn slips, withdrawal receipts, IOUs written on bar napkins, and one hotel keycard. But there was one thing that stopped us cold. The pawn slip was for Lauren's wedding ring. The one she had hidden in the back of her closet after the split. the one she hadn't even realized was missing. He must have come back to the house at some point while we were out. Lauren went white. None of us slept that night. No one said a word the next morning. Not during breakfast. Not while Dad read the paper he wasn't really reading. Not while Lauren packed the baby's diaper bag for a walk she didn't end up taking. Even Mason seemed to sense something was off. He kept close to me, watching everyone like he was waiting for something to explode. The envelope Keith left on the porch was still sitting on the counter, unopened. It wasn't until after lunch that Dad finally picked it up, opened it, and began laying things out on the dining room table. It looked like junk at first: folded receipts, a key card, a crumpled napkin, but it wasn't. It was a roadmap of his downfall. Casino receipts from at least 4 different states. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars spent within hours. A pawn slip for someone else's Rolex. 2 wire transfer receipts to names none of us recognized. One for $4,000 sent just 10 days ago. And near the bottom of the stack, the pawn slip for Lauren's wedding ring. That one hit like a hammer. She stood there staring at it, silent. She hadn't worn the ring since the split but had kept it hidden in the back of her closet, inside a box under a pile of baby blankets. She hadn't even realized it was missing. He'd come back into the house. We didn't know when or how. But he had been inside. That changed everything. Dad had the locks changed by that night. Not just new keys. New hardware, deadbolts, security cams added to the front and back. I watched Mason while the locksmith drilled into the frame. Lauren stayed in her room, feeding the baby, phone on silent. Then that night, Dad called just me and Lauren into the den. He closed the door and pulled out a folder. Inside were legal documents, something his lawyer had drawn up. It was basically a formal declaration that Keith was to be removed from all family ties. The business, the will, insurance. Any financial assets, access rights, or emergency designations. Gone. Dad handed Lauren a pen and said, "This is permanent." He didn't hesitate. She signed without reading it. Then she looked at Dad and said, "Make sure he never gets close to our son." He nodded once. The rest of us followed suit. Even Mom, who had been dragging her feet emotionally through all of this, finally snapped out of her daze. She walked into the den without being asked and told Dad she wanted her accounts secured too. Everything. She didn't want to find out 5 years from now that Keith had used her social security number to open a line of credit in Ohio. It was the first time I'd seen Mom angry. Not sad. Not shaken. Angry. That night, Lauren came into my room after Mason had gone to bed. She sat on the floor next to the laundry basket watching me fold his shirts. She said, "I think he's going to die soon." He said it like a statement, not a fear. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She continued. "Not because I want him to, but because I think he wants to." It was the kind of thing you don't say out loud unless you already know it's true. 2 months passed. No sign of Keith. No texts. No sightings. No more envelopes. Christmas came and went. We tried to make it normal. Lights, tree, gifts. Mason got a sketchbook from Dad, and Lauren surprised him with a set of markers that weren't cheap. It was probably the first real smile I'd seen on his face in weeks. Then 2 days after New Year's, the call came. It was a Nevada number. Dad answered. It was a police officer from Reno. They found Keith in a motel. Overdose. Alone. No ID, no wallet. Just a broken phone with one unsent message open on the screen. I thought I could fix it. Lauren didn't cry. She just sat on the couch with the baby and stared at the floor. We buried him a week later in a quiet service. Just us. No photos. No speeches. No music. The kind of goodbye that comes when someone has burned every bridge before they go. We buried Keith on a Thursday. The sky was dull gray. There was no music, no slideshow, no crowd of mourners. Just 5 of us standing in coats, breathing through the cold. A closed casket, a crooked headstone, and a short reading by a priest who had clearly never met him. Even the dirt seemed reluctant to fall. Lauren held the baby the whole time, calm and expressionless. Not numb, just finished. It was like the grief had happened long ago and this was just the paperwork. There was no reception. No one asked about flowers. No one posted anything online. We got back in our cars and drove home without saying a word. But the quiet didn't mean peace. Not really. The house stayed still for days. No background music. No TV. Even Mason spoke softer, like the volume of the house had dropped and none of us wanted to disturb it. Then one night I woke up to the sound of something crashing. I found Lauren in the garage holding a shattered frame in one hand, a trash bag in the other. Old wedding photos, birthday cards from Keith, his suit jacket. She was throwing it all away piece by piece. She looked at me for a second, then kept going. I didn't stop her. After that, things started to shift. She wasn't suddenly okay. Grief doesn't work like that. But she was moving again. Getting up, making breakfast, calling people back. She even took the baby to a mom group at the library. Came home with a drawing he'd scribbled on construction paper and taped it to the fridge like it was a masterpiece. Dad started working in the garage again, fixing up his old motorcycle. Mom baked more than usual. Mason asked if we could stop using the guest room and just call it his room. I took all of those things as small wins. Then a few weeks later, Lauren asked if I could come with her to see an apartment. 2-bedroom, upstairs unit, no elevator. She didn't smile when she walked through it, but she didn't look scared either. "I think I want this one," she said, staring out the tiny kitchen window. She signed the lease that afternoon. That night, over pizza and paper plates, we had our first real family dinner since Keith died. No tension. No guilt. Just quiet laughter, Mason chewing with his mouth open, the baby flinging crust onto the floor. It almost felt normal. And just when I thought we were done, when the story was finally over, a letter arrived. No return address. Postmarked from Las Vegas. The handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper. No envelope inside the envelope, just the paper itself. It said, "If this reaches you, I'm probably gone. I don't want anything. I don't deserve anything. But I need someone to know I tried. I didn't know how to ask for help. I kept thinking I could turn it around before you all found out. I loved the baby. I'm sorry for everything. You don't owe me forgiveness. I just needed someone to know I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just didn't know how to stop." There was no name signed at the bottom. Just a smudge of ink, like maybe he hesitated then decided against it. Lauren read it 3 times. She didn't cry. She didn't rip it up. She folded it neatly and tucked it into her purse. Later, while we were doing the dishes, she said quietly, "I'll tell the baby one day. Not about everything, but about who his father was before all this." I nodded. She glanced over at Mason and said, "He still likes that mango ice cream?" "Always," I said. He smiled for the first time in what felt like months. There was no dramatic ending. No perfect closure. Just life continuing. A little quieter, a little more careful, but moving forward. Keith never came back into our lives. But the damage he left behind taught all of us something we didn't see coming. Sometimes the worst things are what finally pull the truth to the surface. And from there, if you're lucky, you get to rebuild. The final update. Spring showed up quietly, like it didn't want to make a big deal out of things. The trees outside my parents' house started blooming again, and I realized how long it had been since any of us had looked out the windows without waiting for something to go wrong. Lauren's apartment became a second home faster than I expected. It was small, barely enough room for her and the baby, but she made it feel warm. Cozy. Safe. She found a thrift store armchair, painted the crib herself, even started keeping succulents on the windowsill. She named them after old cartoons we used to watch as kids. One Saturday in April, she invited us over. No birthday, no holiday, just pizza and cheap wine and too many baby toys underfoot. Mason drew a spaceship on her wall calendar and she didn't even flinch. That night when we left, she stood in the doorway holding the baby and waved until our car disappeared. A few weeks later, the happy news came. Lauren got a job offer. It was part-time administrative work at a local pediatric clinic. Flexible hours, benefits, room to grow. She called me the second she got the email. I answered to her, half laughing, half crying, out of breath like she'd just run a race. "They picked me," she said. "They actually picked me." She hadn't worked since before the baby. Not since Keith convinced her she should stay home and focus on being a mom. She didn't say it out loud, but I could hear what the job meant to her. It wasn't just work. It was proof that she could stand on her own again. We celebrated that weekend with takeout and cupcakes. Mom brought wine, Dad brought a weirdly serious toast, and Mason made a "congrats on the job" sign out of construction paper and duct tape. For the first time in a long time, we weren't looking backward. That night, after the dishes were cleared and the baby was finally asleep, Lauren sat beside me on the couch and said, "I'm not scared anymore." I believed her. Things still weren't perfect. But perfect wasn't the goal anymore. Now we just wanted good days. And that night was one of them. Maybe one of the best.